Good afternoon, space flight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. Again, talking about the moon, but a little bit differently this time. I'm going to be taking you on a tour of a moon base, Moon Base Artemis, as envisioned by some engineers and other experts at the Lockheed Martin organization, along with some folks outside of that organization. I found it to be sort of a fascinating novella that they wrote about a moon base in the 2040s, assuming, of course, that we move forward aggressively enough to make something like that happen. And I'm going to go ahead and relate all of that to you. Take you on a little tour of the lunar South Pole and a permanently established human presence there with not a very big population, a few dozen or so, but nevertheless, a permanent presence and a big step forward in our exploration of the solar system. But real quickly, I want to clarify in regards to the episode that I released yesterday. Some folks argued that the actual announcement regarding HLS, regarding NASA looking for alternatives to Starship, is just looking for a backup, looking for additional quotes, that sort of thing. It's really not all that serious, and that Starship is still the primary choice, etc., etc. If that were the case, there is no way in hell that NASA would be seriously looking at these types of proposals this late in the game and looking at investing billions of dollars in these types of proposals, because there's no way that they would get positive responses from the major players in the spaceflight community if there weren't billions of dollars at stake. There's no way that NASA would be looking at making this kind of investment if everything was peachy keen with Starship. And in addition to that, if this were just a proposal looking for backups, but still there being a lot of confidence with Starship, then Elon Musk would not have said all of the nasty shit that he said about Secretary Duffy yesterday. I'm not going to relate everything, but he insulted his intelligence, calling him Secretary Dummy or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things that the guy said. And given the fact that Secretary Duffy is, the guy who's going to be making decisions on who's going to be landing astronauts on the moon, I can't imagine that Elon did that if things were still great with Starship. I think the only reason that he would spew those kinds of insults in a public forum would be if he would already really lost the contract, already lost the opportunity. And unfortunately, by going off the way that he did, he's also put his good friend Jared Isaacman at risk, a man who's been trying so hard to get his foot back in the door after Trump chucked him out of the potential NASA administrator position. He's been working so hard to get his foot back in the door. And now at this point, with these kinds of insults going around and the fact that Duffy is going to have a lot to say about who becomes the actual administrator over at NASA, I would say this really hurt Jared Isaacman's chances of reclaiming this opportunity. Okay, well, all of that having been said, let's not talk about anything negative anymore. Instead, let's take an intriguing tour of the lunar South Pole and Moon Base Artemis. So this novella white paper / video is intended to immerse you in the vision of a moon base in the 2040s by placing you in the driver's seat. We're going to be walking a mile in the dusty boots of a commercial lunar contractor. We'll kick the tires of our rover, explore the construction site of a lunar mega project, and reflect on how and why lunar exploration will have developed over the next 2 decades to achieve this vision. Imagine how you might fit into this rugged lunar community. What is life like at the very edge of the human experience? Welcome to Artemis Base Camp. We hope you enjoy this glimpse into humanity's future. Settling back into the driver's seat, you punch in the final coordinates into the display. The electric motor hums quietly to life and you're off again. The stark black and white vistas of the lunar surface roll quietly by as your rover ferries you to the last site on the list. The drive between maintenance locations is by far the easiest part of the job, and maybe the most enjoyable. long, quiet trips across this magnificent desolation are a great way to spend a good chunk of your 6-month contract. After all, if it wasn't the best seat in the house, the recruiting brochure wouldn't have featured so many beautiful snapshots from the front seat of the rover. These moments of rest between service locations are a well-earned reprieve. You've got a busy job as one of just a few dozen humans keeping the whole moon running. By the 2040s, there is a thriving international community on Earth's nearest celestial neighbor. This is because the moon is the perfect testing ground and resource hub to support humanity's expansion into the solar system. Here, groundbreaking science furthers the pursuit of knowledge and promises answers to the most fundamental questions, like who we are, where we came from, and what might be in store. The moon's alien beauty masks a hostile environment of harsh radiation, vacuum, extreme temperatures, and abrasive dust. It turns out that the life or death challenge of lunar survival makes our nearest celestial neighbor an excellent environment to test out hardware and procedures for Mars, an even more challenging, remote, and unforgiving destination. The moon is an important source of material wealth outside Earth's gravity well. Here, we can develop the resources we need to operate in deep space more sustainably, helping us break free from the long and expensive logistics strain of Earth launch. We've even reached the point where lunar resource development is beginning to flow value back to Earth orbit. For all these reasons, it's only natural that there exists a growing community here as humanity takes its first steps out of its earthly cradle. Your fellow lunar travelers are a diverse bunch. Many are scientist astronauts from the world's various space agencies. Intelligent, highly trained, and level-headed, they are out on the frontier performing trailblazing science. There are also commercial contractors like you, working for companies that provide and maintain cutting-edge infrastructure that enable those science missions and other more routine lunar operations. You work for Aquarius, one of the logistics support companies that keep the moon's infrastructure humming. Its customers comprise organizations across every segment of lunar activity in space transportation, communications, navigation, surface mobility, habitation, power, resource production, and distribution and construction. These systems help turn the barren surface into a more hospitable ecosystem. It's your responsibility to know each piece of this infrastructure backwards and forwards, how it works, how it can break, and how to fix it if it does. And boy, is there a lot of infrastructure. Some of this infrastructure is positioned on orbit above the moon in a near rectilinear halo orbit, or NRHO, and at the first and second Lagrange points, which are essentially gravitational parking lots that utilize the Earth and Moon's gravity to balance out the effects of both worlds, making it easy to place space stations in these locations, space stations that are unlikely to drift off course. This infrastructure includes NASA's Lunar Gateway, commercial habitats, a large cryogenic propellant refinery and depot, and more recently, a staging area for lunar-derived metals and construction materials on their way down well to Earth. These orbiting bases represent the entry ramp of an interplanetary highway that reaches all the way to Martian orbit. Interplanetary transit vehicles arrive here from the moon every 26 months, refueling their enormous hydrogen tanks and taking on crew and cargo for the next Martian mission. In orbit above Mars is a small depot, powered by sunlight, where supplies of water are turned into propellants. This Martian gas station allows for landers to refuel between missions to and from the Martian surface, where, after a half-century of robotic exploration, the beginnings of a small permanent base are being established. By far, the busiest hub remains the lunar South Pole. You remember the view from the lander when you arrived, burning its way down the long arc of the landing trajectory, how the blackness of space gave way to a blinding white horizon as the lander leveled out and the South Polar surface raced up to meet you. There, spread out in all its glory, was the triumphal sprawl of the Artemis base camp. The lunar South Pole in the 2040s is a stunning vision of the human frontier in development. The cluster of landing pads and spaceport infrastructure where you arrived are a bustle of activity. Some landers are in the middle of being loaded or unloaded by support robots, while others are in the process of being refueled for their return to orbit. The landing pads lie on the outskirts of the Artemis base camp, far enough away where there's less of a risk of being impacted by any ejected that gets blown past the pad's protective berms. Rovers dot the scene, crisscrossing the moon from pole to equator. A community of inflatable habitats and workstations occupies the center. An ever-expanding power grid of fission reactors and solar farms provides life-giving energy to all of this infrastructure. Over towards the lip of a yawning crater, resource production and storage facilities keep the growing lunar community alive with water and life support gases, while also supplying the clean, high-efficiency fuels that sustain trade routes linking the Earth-Moon-Mars system. These trade routes are the paths that travelers and uncrewed systems use to carry goods from one place to another, where these goods will have a higher value based on their usefulness and scarcity at the destination. But as a commercial contractor, you know that a trade route is more than just a way of getting from point A to B. Fundamentally, a trade route is a trajectory whose function is a respectable profit. That trajectory becomes commercially viable when the delivered goods return more value than the journey cost. It becomes commercially sustainable when that returned value is repeatable, so that the trader can keep expecting value after they make the delivery 100 times. Trade routes turn a single commercial mission success into a sustainable architecture. A good trade route finds the path of least resistance between the source and destination. A better one creates a cycle of trade where the return journey can profitably carry new, unique, valuable goods from the destination back to the route's origin. By the 2040s, this is how the inner solar system's commercial transportation system has evolved to work. It stretches from Earth orbit to Mars with its hub at the moon. This path is fueled by water-based resources, powered by safe and reliable fission, and buoyed by commercial government collaboration that keeps the value of a clean economy flowing back to Earth. This path is paved with infrastructure, and it's maintained by contractors like you. Now, the inner solar system runs on water for drinking, radiation shielding, a universal solvent, a source of breathable life support gases. Water's many uses make it the inner solar system's resource of choice, and it's ubiquitous. We tend to think of space as dry and barren compared to the oceanic blue marble we call home. But the inner solar system is replete with ice. It can be found in significant quantities in lunar craters, frozen into asteroids, and even in huge quantities at the Martian poles and in subsurface glaciers. And then there's the most critical family of commodities, water-based propellants. Some of the long-haul asteroid mining spacecraft use water in its original form, simply heating it into steam for the journey back to Earth orbit. On the lower efficiency end, hydrogen and oxygen gases and storable high-test peroxide make for readily available attitude control or main engine propellants. But you're a production infrastructure contractor. To you, these are mostly derivative markets. By fraction of sales and by the number of hours you spend poring over the relevant diagnostics and production data, the most important commodities are liquid hydrogen and oxygen. These cryogens, hydrogen and oxygen, also known as LH2 and LOX, are the primary products of your company's systems and the main commercial reason that you're here. As anyone familiar with Tsiolkovsky's rocket equation knows, one of the most important factors in space transportation is the choice of propellant. According to physics and chemistry, that choice is clear. Liquid hydrogen and oxygen constitute the most efficient chemical rocket propellants we know of. What's more, when you put liquid hydrogen through a nuclear thermal propulsion engine, the efficiency doubles and sometimes triples. The bottom line for a company's mission planners was that hydrogen and oxygen offered the smallest propellant mass of any chemical combination required to move a given payload mass through space. Most of the mass an in-space transportation vehicle, like a rocket's second stage or a dedicated space tug, is in its propellant. So for the same payload, lighter liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen upper stages also required smaller first-stage rockets. This advantage increases when you launch empty and refuel on orbit, eventually performing that refueling using propellants already outside of Earth's gravity well produced from lunar water avoids the Earth launch costs of delivering that propellant altogether. This is not to say that the approach was cheap or easy. Hydrogen storage is tricky, as you well know. It has an extremely low density, about 1/14 that of water or liquid oxygen, which requires enormous storage vessels. It requires sophisticated fluid management technologies for long-term storage, boil-off minimization, and transfer from one vehicle to another. Such systems are expensive. The excavation and purification systems required to produce water from icy regolith are challenging and power-hungry, as are the electrolysis and liquefaction systems that turn that water into cryogens. None of these technologies existed in a lunar-ready state at the start of the Artemis program. They had to evolve from their terrestrial versions, and their complexity and difficulty meant significant, non-recurrent engineering costs. A refueling economy must be built on sound business principles. Companies looking to develop cryogenic storage technologies in the 2020s had to ask themselves, would the advantages of a refueling economy built on water-based propellants be worth the significant upfront investment? Over the short term, no. Frankly, the lowest cost lunar exploration architecture looked something like Apollo, where a primary goal was to temporarily visit the moon as soon as possible and just a handful of times using minimalistic, expendable vehicles slimmed down to launch on a single rocket. But the Artemis program is far broader in its scope than Apollo. Through Artemis, humanity was going to the moon to stay. We were heading there to put down roots and to extend ourselves further into the solar system for good. And unlike Apollo, Artemis does not benefit from the most generous budgeting NASA has ever received or ever will. We needed a solution that was the most cost-effective over the long term. So back in the 2020s, your company figured out that on a timescale of decades, the key to financially sustainable space development was to lower the barriers to entry for lunar access while reducing recurring costs. This meant establishing cheap and routine lunar transportation, as cheap as space travel could be anyway. The biggest bang for their buck was going to come from bringing down recurring costs through reusability, and the most critical part of reusability is refuelability. With enough missions heading to the moon, there emerged a clear point in time beyond which the cost curve of a refuelable architecture grew slower than that of a direct disposable one. That's because launch is still the highest unavoidable cost, even now in the 2040s. So the best savings to the customer came from reducing non-payload mass. Because the systems are refuelable, they can perform dozens of missions before the end of their life for just one launch cost. In addition to refuelability, Aquarius's early founders also understood the most cost-effective architectures were based on supply chains that could one day become Earth independent. The solution also had to support Earth's clean energy future, because hydrogen-oxygen propellants are made from water, and because water is found just about everywhere in the inner solar system. LH2 and LOX sourced in space offered a pathway for weaning the lunar economy off of costly Earth-launched logistics. So now, after a decade of large-scale LH2 transport, storage, and refueling under its belt, your company understands how to do it well and repeatedly. Its systems are mature, and many of the known risks are figured out. High-performance cryocooling, zero boil-off, and no vent fill are just some of the clever techniques from a long list of cryofluid management know-how, many of which your company has pioneered over the last 15 years. It offers logistics companies the highest proportion of payload mass to vehicle weight possible, thanks to the performance and efficiency of nuclear hydrogen engines. With the developmental challenges of hydrogen management solved, water-based propellant architectures remain much more attractive than methane-based alternatives. There's a dig against SpaceX. Water is found throughout the inner solar system. Methane, however, can be sourced from only two locations: the surface of the Earth or the surface of Mars, at the bottoms of two deep gravity wells many millions of kilometers apart, with no other viable propellant source in between. Martian in situ resource utilization isn't slated to become commercial scale for a long time. This makes for an overextended supply chain, and one that is unforgiving in the event of an emergency. Even when Martian in situ resource utilization is mature, you have to imagine it will still be more productive to make water-based propellants from ice caps and subterranean ice sheets than trying to wring methane out of Mars's notoriously thin atmosphere. You can see why the cost curve for your company's hydrogen-based architecture is flattened more optimally since the late 2030s and 2040s compared to methane. That's not to say that these architectures are incompatible. Oxygen makes up the majority of the reactive mass of methane burning systems. It can be sourced a few ways, including from the very same water molecules that give your company its hydrogen. In fact, LOX LH2 production naturally generates a surplus of unstable oxygen thanks to a difference in ratios of what is electrolyzed from water versus what is burned by LOX LH2 engines. This surplus can be sold to operators of methane-based architectures. So I guess these guys do business with SpaceX and Starship. As for liquid hydrogen, there is very little being launched from Earth these days. Every year, hundreds of tons of propellant are made locally in space, outside of Earth's deep gravity well, avoiding high transportation costs and environmental impacts of launching all that propellant up through Earth's atmosphere. The orbital gas stations that keep the interplanetary superhighway moving at low cost and high reliability are supplied by an enormous and complex pipeline stretching from the bottoms of craters here on the Moon all the way out to the depot at Mars and back to Earth orbit. This pipeline pulls ice out of the ground, turns it into purified water, cracks that water into life support, and cryo-cools those gases down to the most powerful chemical propellants in existence. Downstream production are surface storage depots, launch infrastructure, on-orbit receiver or catcher elements, and the tugs and other transportation vehicles needed to move these commodities around the inner solar system's trade routes. Pipeline can be a dirty word on Earth. It conjures images of pollution, exploitation, and armed conflict. But today, in space as on Earth, humanity is leveraging the technologies and operational experience gained from extractive industries for a cleaner future. With this hydrogen system, the backbone of a new energy economy in space, humanity has abandoned hydrocarbons for life-giving water to make powerful, clean-burning fuels. The rover starts to slow as you approach the construction site. Like a sculptor's block of marble, the long, gentle slope of a ridge provides the perfect natural foundation upon which to build a ramp to the sky. A flat launcher would be better, as it would reduce the delta V corrections needed at apogee, but given the topography of the region, an incline was needed to clear the horizon. The bottom portion has already been reworked by the earth-moving robots, picked clean of boulders and leveled with uncanny precision to the nearest fraction of a degree. You marvel at the unnatural precision of the geometry. The smoothly sintered strip forms a polygon of jarring regularity against the rugged randomness of the rest of the natural slope, with all its pocks and blemishes and cratered shadows. Alien is the word that comes to mind, as out of place next to its surroundings as the obelisk from 2001: A Space Odyssey. But of course, humans are the alien intelligence here, reforming the surface of a foreign world through our robotic assistance and according to our programming. Taking manual control, you maneuver the rover up to a tiny feature, a small, solitary hill, smooth and unremarkable. The only clue belying the presence of the fission reactor buried here is the communications mast protruding from the regolith and the red strobe on its control panel. The reactor's job is to supply electricity to the robotic workers and construction rakes, but as construction progresses, you know that larger, more powerful, and efficient reactors will be delivered nearby to create the launcher's power generation installation. Rather than using the chemical energy bound up in tanks of rocket fuel to achieve the delta V of launch, the miracle of an electromagnetic launcher lies in its use of electricity, massless energy, delivered at the speed of electrons, powered by megawatt-scale fission reactors, and fine-tuned by the harnessing converters, controllers, and mega batteries of a sophisticated lunar grid. Today, the robots are preparing the system to connect the line from this reactor to the local hub. This is where the next reactor, which is due for delivery soon, will be plugged into the grid. The company will likely have you drive back here in person again to supervise that installation, from a safe location nearby, of course, until the delivery lander has departed and the reactor is buried. Today, though, you're on site as a human in the loop, monitoring and approving the execution of each step of the process. While these days the robots are increasingly capable of performing most operations autonomously, they could still make a mistake while deadheading the line, fitting the harness, or performing any other tricky operations with low tolerance for error. As on Earth, we've used advances in artificial intelligence to automate most of the mundane monitoring and controls for the lunar power grid. You think that sometime soon, contractors standing by to telerobotically take control and execute the operations remotely will be cleared to do so from a greater distance from the job site, perhaps from the comfort of a workstation at a surface habitat or even an orbital station. But the Infrastructure Directorate hasn't yet approved the company for full autonomy for the most critical interfacing operations. Installing critical hardware like a new reactor fall into this bucket, as does today's task of preparing those interfaces and hardware for future integration. So today, you're monitoring from the job site, commanding certain key sequencing and standing by to take remote control of each step, or even suit up and head out to haul cables yourself if needed. Would you like to hear more about this guy's day-to-day life? What he does to maintain this infrastructure in the process of building a fully robust lunar mining industry, something that's going to make some real money for human civilization in the future? Well, if you're interested in that, make sure to leave a comment and I'll come out with a part 2 to this episode in the near future. So once again, intriguing stuff, and in my opinion, probably not really possible unless Starship becomes a mature system. The only way to transport huge amounts of equipment, especially if we're talking about nuclear power plants, that sort of thing, is if we have a transportation system capable of hauling 50, 100, 150 metric tons all the way to the moon. And even though I talk in a way that a lot of people would interpret as being negative about Starship. Really, I think Starship has a huge potential for making a moon base possible, an ambitious and robust moon base possible in the future. I'm just saying that it's not in a position to do that right now. So I wish SpaceX all the success in the world in bringing their Starship solution to a mature and operational state. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel and get access to my videos ahead of everybody else, early releases along with exclusive content and other benefits, well, please check the description. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.